on how it ultimately goes and ends up, I suppose. And in the second song, it talked about, you're not alone. It's always good not to be alone, right? We like to have people around us, but it's just as good, if not largely better, to have the one true God that we can be in His presence. And that's a wonderful, wonderful thing. So I'm going to do a little bit something kind of, unorthodox this morning compared to what, seem to be used to. But first, I'm going to get you up to speed on where we're going to be. We're going to be in Daniel 3. That's where we're going to be today. But if we go back to the beginning of Daniel, like I said, we've been doing Bible study, and we've been in the book of Daniel, and we spent time in there in the past, but it's a whole lot different situation when you get a group of people together and you just talk. It's a really neat thing to do. You can see things a little different because people always have different perspectives, and that's why I really enjoy small groups, because you get to see things a little different. So it's always good. We all got ideas of what things are all about, and then somebody else says, what about this? And then you realize, well, I never really looked at it that way. So that's always good. So the Babylonians, they captured Jerusalem in 605 BC. There was 3 different invasions. But not only did they take Nebuchadnezzar, the king, but they also took some of the furnishings from the temple, and they put it in the Babylonian temple, which, as you get further in Daniel, you realize something happened there too. But they also took a lot of the young men, and they kind of picked the cream of the crop, the ones that says they were good-looking young men, they were well-educated, they could learn rather quickly, and so they picked the best of the best. Generally, there's around 13 to 17 years old, and they took them into civil service. So they taught them, history of the Babylonian Empire and the literature, everything they could. Generally, when it come down to it, it was somewhat of a brainwashing exercise to say, you're not Hebrew anymore, you're one of us now. Now take all the knowledge and abilities you have and apply it to us. Which I guess in a way we talked about that in the children's corner with the talents they had. They had talents, God-given talents. These young men did, and they were generally saying, instead of using it for this situation, use it for us, help us to prosper. So once they selected those, they were trained in service. So among this group was Daniel, and also the 3 Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, which these were names given to them a little later. The neat thing is, if we go to Daniel 2 and 17, when Daniel, because the first part, they're brought in, and then they go through the deal with, they're given a special diet in the palace. And Daniel says, I really don't want any part of that, because some of this meat had been sacrificed to Babylonian gods. So we don't really want to partake in that meat because, it's filthy the way we look at it. So we'll just have vegetables. And I'm going to shorten this up just to get to 3. That's where we're going to be today. And so he said, just give me vegetables and water, and God will take care of the rest. And by the end of that time period set aside, they looked healthier, stronger, and better than the others that had been given all this special diet from the king. So God saw them through that. Then we get to the second. The king had a dream, and it kept him up. He was concerned. He was worried about it. And he had the astrologers and all the soothsayers come, and he said, hey, I want to know not only what my dream meant, but I want you to tell me what that dream was. And they said, it's impossible. How will we know what your dream is? And so his idea was, well, you're the soothsayer. That's your job. You tell me. So they couldn't do it. And so he said, Nebuchadnezzar, we'll find out, has a bit of an anger problem. So he said, you know what, we'll just kill all the wise people of the kingdom. So it got back to Daniel. He fit in that category. So they went to find Daniel and the 3 boys, and the idea was to kill him. And he inquired what the situation was, and they told him, and he said, well, I'll tell you what, take me to the king. They went to the king, and he said, give me some time, and I'll tell you what, not only what your dream was, but tell you what it meant. So they went back to he went back home, and guess who he talked to? He talked to those 3 boys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and said, listen, I need you to pray. We need God to step in, help us out with this dream, not only save our lives, but also save the other people's lives too, and also bring glory to God in that process. So that what brings us up to 3. So every time, every chapter of this book, God is glorified, and it's through these young men that generally it happens. And so we're going to be in 3, and I tell you what I'm going to do this morning. Relax, try not to go to sleep, but I'm going to read the whole chapter of Daniel 3, and then we're going to go from there and kind of get into it a little deeper and see if we can get a little more out of it. So King Nebuchadnezzar set up an image of gold, 90 feet high and 9 feet wide, and he set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. He then summoned all the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all other provincial officials to come to the dedication of the image he had set up. So the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all other officials assembled at the dedication of the image that he had set up, and they stood before it. Then the herald loudly proclaimed, "This is what you are commanded to do, O peoples, nations, and men of every language. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the lyre, the zither, the harp, the pipes, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship it immediately will be thrown into a blazing furnace. Therefore, as soon as you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, the harp, and all kinds of music, all the peoples and the nations, every man and language, fell down and worshiped the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up." At this time, some astrologers came forward and denounced the Jews and said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "O king, live forever. You have issued a decree, O king, that everyone who hears the sound of the horn and the flute and the zither and the lyre and the harp and the pipes and all kinds of music must fall down to worship this image of gold, and that whoever does not fall down to worship this image will be thrown into a blazing furnace. But there are some Jews who have been set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you, O king. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold that you have set up." Furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king, and Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold that I have set up? Now then, when you hear the sound of the horn and the flute and the zither and the lyre and the harp and the pipes and all kinds of music, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image that I made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hands?" Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we be thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to save us from it, and he will rescue us from your hand. O king, but even if he does not, we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image that you have set up." Then Nebuchadnezzar was furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and his attitude towards them changed. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual and commanded some of the strongest soldiers in the army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them in the blazing furnace. So these men, wearing their robes and trousers and turbans and other clothes, were bound and thrown into the blazing furnace. The king's command was so urgent and the furnace so hot that the flames and the fire killed the soldiers that took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, firmly tied, fell into the blazing furnace. Then King Nebuchadnezzar leaped to his feet in amazement and asked the advisors, "Weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire?" They replied, "Well, certainly, O king." He said, "Look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods." Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace and shouted, "Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here." So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire, and the satraps, prefects, governors, and royal advisors crowded around them, and they saw the fire had not harmed their bodies. Not was a hair on their head singed. Their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, "Praise be to God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted him and their lives rather than to serve and worship any god except their own God. Therefore I decree that the people of every nation and language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut into pieces, and their houses be turned to piles of rubble. For no other God can save this way." Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. It's a lot of reading, wasn't it? I made it. So as we go through it, we're just going to go through kind of like, I guess really in a way like we do in Bible study. I think it's really important that, it's great that we take time to read the Bible, read God's Word, but I think it's important we do our very best with what we've got to understand it the very best we can. So we're going to kind of split up into groups as we go through. So 1 and 3, we've got the circumstances. Nebuchadnezzar set up an image of gold. It was 90 feet tall, 9 feet wide, around over 9 stories tall. It's quite the thing to set up, wasn't it? Wonder what he was after. He was after some acknowledgement, right? Look what I've done. Look at me. So we set it up, and then he gives some orders. When the music plays, everyone is to fall down and worship this image. And at that time, all the dignitaries, remember the whole list of all these people showed up? It was the who's who's. It was the mayors, the congressmen, the senators, all those kind of people. They were there for this dedication. Now, whether they were there just to show for the king that, yes, I'm here for you, maybe it didn't mean anything to him, I don't know. But they showed up to be there to dedicate this image. And then 4 through 5, we get the command. Now, to defy this command was a very serious situation. It says immediately. We're not going to talk about it. Immediately you'll be thrown into a blazing furnace. It's a pretty serious situation there. So what's the cost? In 6, it says, anyone who refuses to worship will be tossed in immediately. One thing in our life, I think there's always a cost, right? In anything we do, there's always a cost. If we happen to stay up late, the cost is we don't want to get up in the morning. If we get up too early, by the time it gets towards the evening, we're wore out, right? If we decide to hit that snooze a few more times, we might be late to work. There's a cost there, right? But ultimately, we look at it, there is a cost when we decide to get serious about serving God. There is a cost. Now, other countries see it, I think, way more than what we do. I don't think we've seen persecution, if ever, like other countries have. But there is a cost. It may cost you something, it may cost you friends, it may cost you the way things are going now, it may cost you a job, but there is a cost. So there's a choice in verse 7. When the music played, the people quickly fell down. It seems like it was pretty immediate. They didn't question it. They didn't look around. And sometimes we do that, not on as far as an idle deal, but in the morning when it's time to stand up, to sing, you kind of look around who's going to be first. When somebody stands up, everybody else does, It's just kind of what people do in crowds. It's the way it works. But here it seems like it was pretty quick. They heard the decree. They didn't want any part of the fiery furnace. So when the music started, everybody hit the ground, right? Now, I don't know what was going on in their minds. We don't know. But sometimes most of the time, the action is probably more important than the intent anyway. So that was a choice they had. They had 2 choices, either bow or not. You and I are faced with choices every day, and I kind of talked about it with the cost. I mean, we make choices. Really, that's what life is, choice after choice after choice. We make them all the time. But ultimately, the ones that matter, we can do what we know is right in God's eyes, or we can do what we want to do. That may be disobedience to God, it may not be. So the question would be, what's more important? What people think about us or what God thinks about us? It's something we need to think about as we make our choices. What's the motive behind it? So just as all the people had a choice, those 3 young men had a choice as well, whether or not to take a stand. And actually, literally, their choice was whether or not to take a stand. We have a choice, once again, are we going to take a stand in our lives for who God is? So verses 8 through 12, it's all about control. Nebuchadnezzar wanted control of his kingdom, as really most kings do. Some kings for good, some kings not so much. Now, the thing about this, there were some, I think jealousy played a big part in this, because you notice there may have been other people that didn't bow down, we don't know. But there were also other people that might not have been in positions of power like these 3 Hebrew boys were. So the astrologers, or the Chaldeans, they were the ones that kind of had power before these guys showed up. They were the ones to go to. And remember, back in chapter 2, they couldn't do anything about this dream, but through the power of God, these guys could. So they were a little jealous. They were a little upset. These foreigners came in and took their spot. So there might have been something there too. So they wanted to expose them for their disrespect, or the way it seemed, of the king. They pointed them out to Nebuchadnezzar because, like I said, they wanted what they had. So we're in a spiritual battle now, each and every one of us. And there's things that go on around us that we can't see. Spiritual battle all the time. And when it comes down to it, the battle to win is who is in control of our life. So what's happened to these young men, really at this point, to an extent, is out of their control. Yes, they made the choice not to bow. But in a way, if your attitude's right, it's not really a choice. And we'll find out a little later, they didn't think much about it. They didn't have to think about it. So it wasn't really their fault. So we need to remember that God is in control and He knows what's going on. And sometimes things do happen to us that is out of our control. And we can't do anything at all about what other people do. We can't do anything about other people's attitudes or what they say or how they behave. But we definitely can do something about what we do and how we behave. And that's what we're, in charge of. That's what we need to answer for. So 13 through 15 was the challenge. The king challenged them to change their minds. They got a second chance. So either maybe Nebuchadnezzar didn't really want to throw him into the furnace, or maybe he was just a little upset the position he was put in. Got all these people of the kingdom, like I said, all the satraps, prefects, governors, they were all there. All the heads of state were there, and now I got these people saying, no, I'm not going to do what you said. So maybe it was just awkward positions. Now I got to do something. My hands are tied now. So he brings them up separate, kind of out of the way, and says, listen, I'm going to give you a second chance. Now, when the music plays, if you want to bow, it's not everybody out there now, it's just kind of us. So if you want to bow, that's okay. That'd be good. Everything will be forgiven. We'll be all right. Or if not, I'm going to throw you into the furnace. So their challenge was whether to put God first or themselves. They say opportunity knocks only once, right? But we can be sure that temptation knocks over and over and over and over again. So another challenge here, Nebuchadnezzar even challenges God. He challenged him when he put the image up. Everybody come worship the image. Don't know what the image was. My assumption is maybe it kind of had a little bit of resemblance to him. We don't really know. But we know in chapter 2 there was a dream of a large statue, an image, and it was gold, bronze, silver, iron, things like that, different. This was all gold, so maybe the idea was he was thinking, okay, maybe I'll challenge this, it's all gold. It's going to last forever. My kingdom is strong. So he not only challenged God that I'm going to set it up and there's nothing you can do about it, because he said, no God can save you from me, from my hands, but he also challenged God with the ability to do anything about it. One, I'm going to set up my statue. They're going to come worship. And two, I'm going to do what I want to people that don't bow down to it. At this point, I'm going to throw these 3 young men that I know has been serving you, their God, into this furnace, and you can't do a thing about it. So they had confidence. In 16 through 18, the 3 didn't even have to talk about it. And that's one of my favorite verses. They said, we don't even need to discuss this matter with you. That's pretty neat. And back years ago, I did youth group, and that's one thing I tell the kids often. Big decisions in life, decide now. Whatever it's going to be. The big things in life that's going to affect you, make your decision now. Don't wait till somebody comes and says, hey, what about this? Because then you got to try to figure something out. But make your decision now, and these guys already had. I'm sure when it came up and it said, okay, well, here in the Herald say, okay, when the music starts, everybody bow. I'm sure they didn't look around and go, hey, Shadrach, what are you doing? I don't know, Meshach, what are you doing? You bowing? I don't think I'm going to bow. Well, if you don't, I don't. We'll on it together, but if you do, I'll do it. I'm sure they didn't think about it. When it says like, nope, I'm just going to stand up. They didn't think about it. So we need to be, I guess, ahead of the game and think about how far would we go? How far would we go for God and or even against God? So it wasn't debatable in their minds. They had a higher authority to answer to, as do we. They had confidence in God. They knew that God could do 2 things. 1, deliver them from the furnace, or 2, deliver them from the hand anyway. He could change Nebuchadnezzar's mind. He could do either way, and they were comfortable with it. So on their idea, it was like, well, okay, God can change your mind. We can move on from this right now. Or if he throws us in the fire, he could save us from there. Or, if not, if we go to the fire, we get burned up. Either way, we win. It was a win-win situation for them. They had some compromise here. Compromise. They could have compromised their faith. They could have justified it. They could have had some excuses. How many of us are good at excuses? Just in general. I'm pretty good at it. We can all come up with some excuses. And I'm sure we can all justify some things now and again, right? It can happen. Maybe they could have said, everybody's doing it. I'll just go along with the crowd. There's thousands of people here. What? You think they're going to notice 3 of us? And maybe we won't all the way bow down. Maybe we'll just kind of shrink down a little bit. We're not really bowing, but, won't stand out at least. It won't be so bad. What harm will it do? We're not really hurting anybody. Not that big a deal. How can I be an effective witness if people don't like me? If I make a stand here, they're going to say, well, they're the ones that didn't bow down. We do things like that. I'll do it now and ask forgiveness later. Sometimes that's the way it goes. I'll go through the motions, but not really worship. God knows my heart. You know, you and I are pressured every day to compromise our faith, to make excuses for why we do or do not do things. Sometimes we even justify our disobedience to God. So everybody was watching these young men at this time. They're up in the king's palace. This is the second chance. Everybody's watching, and I'm pretty confident there's probably a whole lot of people watching each of us too, especially if they know you go to church. They know you attend church. They tend to look and see how you handle things. It's important to them because if you don't handle it any different than anybody else, then why bother? Why would they need that? It's a huge, sometimes our testimony is simply what we don't do, more so than what we do. So conform. They could have conformed to everybody around them and do what everybody else is doing. We aren't to be shaped by those things around us. We'll be shaped with the Holy Spirit that's inside of us. The more Jesus is in control of our lives, the more we not only allow him to come in, but we do our Bible study, know what his character is, the more he becomes part of us. And that way, there's no wiggle room in those aspects of it. Nothing else to come in because we're full of his Spirit. In 24 and 25, companionship. Not only, they had each other. And what a cool thing to have a church family, that we can have each other. And that's a wonderful, wonderful thing. Each of us have had different experiences in life and gone through different things. And it's so neat that we can lean on each other. And that's such a great thing to have a church family. They had each other as well. Once again, I don't think it was a discussion when the herald made his announcement. I think they all knew what each other's going to do, and they knew they were going to be there through it all together. But through that, they said that there was one that looked like the Son of God, a son of a God, in the furnace. I myself believe that was Jesus in there with them. So God didn't protect them from the fire, but he was there with them in the midst of it. God's not always going to protect us from trials and troubles. I'm sure we've all had them. Some more so than others, some a lot more than others, but they're going to be there. Being faithful to him in those trials will be worth it someday when we see him face to face. It may not be pleasant in the trial you're in now. I'm sure it's probably not. But remember that in verse 25, it said that he was walking in the midst of the fire. It's kind of the same way if we think, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. It doesn't say, I run, I walk. You're making it through. You're going through. It's intentional. And God is there with us through it all. 26 and 28, there's comfort. Kind of seems like an odd place for comfort. They're sitting in a fiery furnace, right? It was so hot that the soldiers threw them in. They died before they ever got there. But there was comfort. We said when they got out, didn't even smell like smoke. Anybody ever sit around a campfire? Generally, you try not to sit in the smoke, right? You try to stay away from it. But guess what? You still smell like smoke. It's still there. They were in the middle of this fire. Didn't even smell like smoke. Sometimes I wonder, I don't know if they saw that fourth person in there with them. I don't know if they saw it or not. Don't really know. But I wonder if they were in any hurry to leave. I don't know. May not have been. May not have been. So how could they have been comfortable in that furnace? Because Jesus was there with them. They had nothing to worry about. He's there to give you comfort, strength, and hope and peace in our trials. Just like the song said earlier, we're not alone. We have each other, and we also, more importantly, have our Heavenly Father. And then credit, 28 through 30. Nebuchadnezzar gives credit to the God of the three Hebrews. The king promoted them, and God honored their faithfulness. God gets the credit and God gets the glory when we're faithful to him. So as we walk through trials, we never know who is looking at us to see how we're going to handle it. We just don't know those things, and I believe there are a lot of people that do. God may have you going through trials so that others can just kind of see him in the middle of it, and I do believe that. He knows what we can handle, and he gives us strength to get through those things, but he also knows what other people need, and sometimes they need to see it in action before they can believe it as well. So Nebuchadnezzar in verse 29 says, there is no other God who is able to deliver in this way. And as we go through, continue in Daniel, we realize that he still doesn't call God his God. It's still the God of the three Hebrew boys, or whether the God of Daniel, the God of the Hebrews, but it's not his God. He hasn't accepted that quite yet, but he sees there's something there. He can't deny it. And if you think about it, all the governors and the prefects and everybody else, they can't deny it either. They saw it. They were part of it as well. So as Christians, we must take a stand for God. And I tell you what, it's not always easy. All too often, in the good times, when things are going well, we get complacent. Sometimes we take God for granted. Sometimes we even ignore him and forget to praise and worship him in the good times. And in the bad times, when things aren't going well, we get discouraged, which sometimes we do. Maybe sometimes it seems we even act like God is nowhere to be found. We blame God. Sometimes we look for ourselves for the solutions instead of God. But God had a purpose for this fiery furnace experience of these young men. And I guarantee he has a purpose for whatever fiery furnace experience either you're going through or you have went through, and he's right there with you in the middle of it. So as we close our service, if anyone would like to pray, the altar's open, be happy to pray with you. Or pray at your seat. The idea is talk to God, let him know. Good times and bad times. If things are going great now, take a moment here in the next few minutes, just say thank you. Thank you for the sunrise coming up this morning, the sunset last night, the good night's sleep, whatever it might be. Every breath that we take, every time our heart beats is a gift from God. Everything good comes from God, we know that. If you're going through a trial now, just understand it is temporary. The idea is everything here on earth is temporary. The idea is what we go to is eternity. What we do now affects where we're going to be forever. And that's what we're looking for, and that's where we're at. So I don't know if Daniel's coming down, if he's got a song prepared or... Yep, I think he does. I thank you all so much for listening so intently this morning. But yeah, let's all stand as we sing.